And good morning, and welcome to The Skinny for Friday, December 12th. I'm Mitch Perry, the senior political reporter for the Florida Phoenix. Flying solo for the next couple of weeks as my partner, Ray Rowe, is taking some time off before the Christmas holidays. Actually, you might remember last week, Ray said he's going to be in Hawaii this weekend running in a marathon. Will he survive? We will try to check in with him the next few days, and maybe we can get back to you next week because he'll be out next week as well. Okay, so later in the show, in the spirit of the holidays, we're going to tell you about a gathering of political candidates taking place in eastern Hillsborough County next week, where people can actually also donate some much-needed school supplies to. So we'll talk about that towards the end of the program. But first, in studio right now, we have Democratic State Representative Lindsay Cross here. Good morning, Lindsay.
Good morning, Mitch.
Great to have you here with us. We're talking about a lot of different things going on with state government, like congressional redistricting, property taxes, and also AI. I don't know if you folks saw this yesterday. Time Magazine naming AI as Person of the Year. Yeah, a little premature in my opinion. We know it's coming, but what did they do this year as a group or what have you? Lindsay, to tell you, the listeners, if you're not familiar with Lindsay Cross, she represents St. Petersburg and Pinellas Park in Florida House District 60th District. She was first elected in 2022 and reelected in 2024. She's also an environmental scientist who has previously worked for organizations like Florida Conservation Voters. Again, Lindsay, thanks so much for coming in today. First story, top of the list, actually. I don't know if you saw this, the Tampa Bay Times reporting today that something that was reported last fall. This was about Ron DeSantis diverting money from state taxpayer funds, basically, to help pay for against constitutional amendments 3 and 4, right? Of course, our listeners probably know that. One was about abortion rights, one about recreational cannabis. So the Times/Miami Herald is reporting today. They're putting it down there. And this has been reported last year. We certainly talked about it on the program. Jason Garcia has done a lot of great reporting on this. But I guess they have the documents, the receipts, as they say. Let's see that some of that money includes $4 million from the state's opioid settlement trust fund, directing it towards those campaigns, another $1 million from the Department of Children and Families. The Times story includes a comment from Senator Rick Scott's office, which says, quote, the allegations of a diverting tax dollars from critical populations in our state towards political consultants and ads are deeply concerning. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I would go further than deeply concerning. I think it's corruption. And I appreciate the efforts of one of my colleagues from the Panhandle area, Andrade. Alex Andrade, in his work to expose what's happening with the Hope Florida scandal. And I hope that the House continues to push this effort because we need to have a resolution. There needs to be people who are accountable and probably go to jail for this. You know, if it was anyone else but the governor and his cronies, we would have seen, I think, some type of resolution already.
Yeah, Hope Florida, absolutely. We're seeing there's a grand jury. We're going to see if anything comes out of that up in the Tallahassee area. Jack Campbell there on this story. And I remember, it seemed on the surface, and I think one of your colleagues, Kelly Skidmore at the time, was actually saying that this was, against Florida law as we know it, last fall. I believe Senator Jason Pizzo actually filed a lawsuit and he lost. I'm always kind of curious. I get to go back and look at the lawsuit, obviously, to see why he did lose, because on the surface, this does seem very much against the law. And I know, in fact, anyway, we'll have to wait and see. But I would think, as you guys gather next month, Andrade, and obviously the Florida House showed, Republican leadership under Danny Perez showed that they weren't really afraid this past year to go after the governor when some things are just stark in their face that it would be just incredibly disingenuous and political not to. Yeah. And finally, that's happening. Some people would say it'd be great to have an attorney general look at this. It's probably not going to happen here. Special prosecutor, that's not going to happen. So we'll wait and see on that. But that's a big story, I think. And we'll see how Governor DeSantis responds to it, because I know he kind of basically said it was appropriate basically to use this money. But this is, again, money for the Department of Children and Families, other departments that's where our taxpayer money is supposed to go to. Mm-hmm. So we'll have to check out on that. Another thing happening right now is actually just watching this on the Florida Channel is vaccines. As we speak, Florida Surgeon General Joseph Ladapo and the Department of Health is having their first public hearing in Panama City Beach. I guess the rulemaking process, right? Because they're about these mandates on school entry vaccines. I guess there's 11 of them. 4 of them they can change via rules. 7 the legislature would have to change. And I know I've seen Democratic Senator Carlos Guillermo Smith has introduced a bill to put all 11 vaccines mandates under state control. Interesting, Representative Cross, because Governor DeSantis, I think it was Latipo, was in Hillsborough County back in early September when they announced they were going to do this. We asked him at the time, have you talked to the legislature because you're going to need the legislature's help and getting rid of 7 of these vaccines? They said they hadn't then. I have not seen a bill yet filed. Of course, we have a month to go to do this. I think Senate President Ben Alpern was asked this the other day, and he was kind of wishy-washy, kind of surprising there. What's your thoughts about this idea of getting rid of, again, they say, hey, you can still get your child can get a mandate, or excuse me, can get a vaccine, but we're not going to mandate that they do.
Well, I'd be opposed to any changes to these vaccine mandates. We know that vaccines save lives, and I think vaccines overall got a bad rap after COVID, although we know that over 1 million people died of COVID, and lives have been saved because of having access to the vaccines. I know people whose parents had polio and their lives were changed forever. And so the idea that we're going to potentially have some of these childhood illnesses that have, life-altering consequences come back. We've seen, explosions of things in small towns in Texas, even things pop up in Florida. And there's still religious exemptions for families if they don't want to get the vaccines. By making these things, taking them from a mandate to something that's optional, it's just an additional step that parents have to take with so many things going on in their child's lives. I think it will lead to people being confused, maybe hearing rhetoric about how these things are unsafe when it's really unfounded. And the long-term repercussion is that we're going to have people getting sick and potentially die.
Yeah, and again, I think it's going to be very interesting to watch to see if we see something on the legislative front. All you need to do, of course, is have somebody file a bill in both chambers. Doesn't mean it's going to pass. And again, as we just mentioned, especially the Florida House showing more backbone, not running with everything that Ron DeSantis wants. I think that'll be very interesting to note. Something I want to ask you about that was just also talked about in our previous hour on the Down and Dirty with John Dingfelder is this first black bear hunt in Florida is taking place right now. First time in a decade. Very little information coming out since it began last Saturday, by the way. We know that FWC, they approved this summer, despite criticism that there was no need to pare down the bear population, estimated to be around 4,000, 4,050. There were permits to originally kill 172 bears. Now it's down 157 bears. There was a pending lawsuit filed by the group Bear Warriors United. Just like the vaccines, this is something that was not, in terms of public opinion, people are not for this. That was clearly shown, and it's ongoing right now. What are your thoughts there?
Well, I actually wrote a letter to the commission over the summer and asked them not to do this, and particularly looking at some of the techniques that they were going to allow, which can be really cruel to the bears, the use of hunting dogs. I have friends who are hunters, and they'll tell me, it's really difficult because they're in these dense palmettos. And, if you're having to go to an area where it's so dense that you need a dog, but your rationale is that these bears are coming into areas where humans are living and potentially, threatening humans, those things don't line up. People are actively pursuing these bears. The reason why we have problems with human-bear interactions is because we've reduced so much of their habitat, and people haven't taken some of the proactive steps needed to, secure their garbage and make it less attractive. And so I think the rationale from some people to do this bear hunt doesn't match up with the science and with the public sentiment. I woke up on Saturday morning with a pit in my stomach, knowing that this was starting, and remembering some of the images that came out from the bear hunt, a decade ago. And I think it's concerning that we haven't seen any results, and it's been going on for almost a week right now. FWC, as an agency, does a lot of good work, but I have concerns about some of the people who are on the board, how heavily it leans towards developers and people whose interest I don't think align with the mission of the organization. There was another incident this summer with a giant manta ray that was captured off the coast of Panama City. It was eventually transported to the Middle East and will live out the rest of its life at SeaWorld Abu Dhabi. That's another thing that I've been concerned about and calling on the commission to make changes and to protect our threatened and endangered wildlife. So we see things like that where the public is adamantly opposed. They're concerned about the things that are happening, but there hasn't been any proactive changes to those type of policies. I think we need to continue to look at those things that are happening and demand changes.
Again, if you're just tuning in right now, it's 17 minutes past the hour. You're listening to The Skinny here on WMNF 88.5 FM. I'm Mitch Perry, speaking with Representative Lindsey Cross, representing an area of Pinellas County in the legislature. The legislature, of course, yesterday just finishing up the last of their 6 committee weeks that lead into the regular legislative session. I think I saw kind of a bit of your video town hall or Zoom town hall the other night. And I know you talked a lot about, and because you haven't filed your bills yet for this coming session, but you're going to be looking again, I believe, at hurricane preparedness or things around that in terms of how we deal with that. Representative Cross, I know your area, which is I'm in your area in St. Petersburg. We saw, got devastated by Helene last year. Milton followed up. We don't talk about it as much anymore. It's been over a year now. But there are still folks. I just saw a photo the other day of somebody I know. Actually, I won't mention who she is, but her home is still not. It's still not there. It hasn't been repaired yet, and there's still people going through that. This was such a devastating impact on our area here. In terms of whether it's legislation, I guess we'll go there. But in terms of how are you as a representative of this area? How are you seeing this now again a year later, and what we can do to better, I guess, prepare ourselves for, potentially this happening again, which it probably will at some point?
Yeah. So that was certainly hurricane preparedness and response was the focus of my policies last year in 2025, and working collaboratively with colleagues in the House and the Senate, we were able to get some good things done. For example, it's now a requirement for each city and county to have at least one site identified and pre-approved for disaster demolition. So when people are hauling all of the contents out of their house that have been soaked and have been destroyed, some of the cities, particularly our small beach towns, had no place to put that debris before it ultimately got hauled off. And that's just an oversight that we can't stand for. So now it's a requirement. There's also a template for all cities and counties to develop an emergency management plan. Our larger cities like St. Pete and Pinellas Park, we're doing those things. Our counties certainly were required to do that. But it's those small towns that probably have very low staffing level, right, that aren't prepared but are very vulnerable to some of these impacts. So we had some good things happen last year, largely through SB 180. This year, I've got some other policies I'm looking at. One of them in particular is how we can get more support for permitting and building inspections so that when people are trying to rebuild and put up the drywall and, put the electrical back in, it's going to be faster for them to get a permit. And so we're looking at everything from using private contractors to folks out of state, making sure that they have the proper training so they know about the unique standards that we have, our Florida Building Code standards. Maybe things are more stringent in individual counties, but giving them the training so that they can have the ability to temporarily work with our local permitting and inspection staff to supplement that, because it's not realistic that any community is going to have staffing levels, double or triple what they normally have. That would be, probably be something that DOJ would say, you've got too many staff. Right. But in times of emergency, we need to be able to deploy people, but make sure that they're doing it in a responsible way.
Now, did I hear, I don't know if it's from you or one of your colleagues, about having people come from other states to when the situation is, because you don't have them maybe on staff all the time because you don't really need them all the time, but when there is a crisis like we had last year, you can people come from other places here to boost up these folks, whether it's permitting or what have you, in the local governments, the very small ones like we do have on the Pinellas County beaches, for example.
Yeah, exactly. So I've been working closely with the Division of Emergency Management and looking at the example that they have with something called mutual aid agreements. So there's already this network of contractors, staff from other states that will come down and help after emergencies. That might be linemen, that might be, fire and rescue. And those people have the training, the credentials to do that work. But the problem that we have is that Florida's building code standards are more stringent than a lot of other states because we have had so many storms and hurricanes, things that, Hurricane Andrew, really increased the...
Yeah, we've seen that the homes built after that are much more sturdier, than before.
Yep. So if we can get people from out of state the training they need to come in and temporarily support our local staffing, that's going to make ensure that people are getting those permits in a faster timeline and being able to rebuild and recover their lives.
Again, if you're just tuning in right now, we're speaking with Pinellas County Democratic Representative Lindsay Cross. She'll be here for a little bit more here today, about, 11:45, 11:50 or so, hopefully. So if you want to give us a call right now, speak to the representative, 813-239-9663. You can also send us a note via an email at dj@wmnf.org. Now, you did mention SB 180. We got to follow up on that. And we know your colleague, Nick DeSegli, and I know I've covered this extensively, and I know Nick DeSegli was coming from a very good place when he put this bill out to deal with just that. Nick lives in, I believe, Indian Rocks Beach, and he was very angry, and I think personally, but also he knew many people who were having the longest time to get permits, to rehabilitate their house, and he was very. That's where that legislation came from. We got to do better. And we do. And as you mentioned, we do need to do that. The problem is, of course, these other things that we're stuck on it that are just, it's led to, I believe, 25, 30 cities now to sue in terms of the restrictions they're having here on different parts of development and what can be challenged or not. That goes until 2027, basically throughout the whole state. A lot of excesses that came out of this bill that we are told, are going to be, fixed in the current session or the session that will begin in a month. What are your thoughts about that? Because this has really become, I think, the most controversial bill that was passed in 2025 session that didn't seem that controversial when it was passed, but has really just blossomed into a real headache for so many communities in our state. Yeah.
So the language specifically that has been concerning and is language around development, preempting local governments from having any policies that are more restrictive or burdensome for redeveloping. And so that can be looked at very broadly. So if a city like St. Petersburg or St. Pete Beach is looking to make measures to improve resiliency in their communities, we already have something called the 50% rule from FEMA. So if a home is flooded and it cost 50% of the cost of that house to rebuild it, they have to come up to current building code standards. So that's already one metric that we have in place, but burdensome and more restrictive can look very, very broad. It could be having a bike lane or things related to the Live Local Act, which are focused on increasing affordable housing options. This is not new language. This was in a bill that we saw during a special session in 2022, less than a month after I was elected. And so it was response to the hurricanes that hit down in Southwest Florida and, Fort Myers area. This same language about burdensome and restrictive was in a language carried by Representative Gia Lombardo. And my aide and I actually caught that because it had I believe, 100-mile radius between the two storms that hit. And we, took out not our compass, but we literally draw some lines on the map, and it encompassed, 75% or more of the state that would fall under this restriction. And St. Petersburg, for example, wouldn't be able to implement some of these Live Local provisions, even though we did not have a direct hit or any impact from those storms. And so this language has been recycled But I think because it was in a bill during regular session, people had more time to look into it and what the implications would be. And so groups like Thousand Friends of Florida, cities and counties that have sued because of this, I think it's appropriate that they're doing that because it is, a very aggressive preemption that is ultimately going to make our communities less resilient, less able to, adapt to what their residents and businesses need right now. We already make it, I think, easy enough for developers to do what they want. It's difficult for citizens and, local governments to challenge things. And this just puts all the power in the developers.
And that does seem to be a battle every session, right? That there's going to be legislation that's going to... It's pro-development, quite frankly. And it depends, I guess, how egregious it is, how quickly the media can kind of sometimes see these bills early on to alert the public, to alert the groups, to flood Tallahassee and say, let's not have this happen, because that is de rigueur. That transcends Ron DeSantis. That's been going on for decades here. We've got one call here, Representative Cross. So let's bring David in from Tampa. David, good morning.
Yeah, hi. Thank you for bringing Representative Cross on the show today. I'm just curious what's her take on, I feel that they're turncoats, Susan Valdez and Hillary Castile, for jumping ship and joining the Republican Party.
Yeah, okay. That's very direct. Thank you, David. Yeah, that happened, I guess, for Hillary Castile was about a year ago, right? And then Susan Valdez. Actually, they both were running both in December of last year. What do you think about that?
I think it's really disingenuous to the voters that elected them that, there's a certain percentage of the vote you're going to get because of who you are as a person. But a lot of people are voting for what your party is, whether it aligns with their values or not. And so voting for a Democrat in 2024 is different maybe than voting for a Republican 10 years ago. And so if you value things such as women's ability to make their own healthcare decisions, if you want to see more support for our public schools rather than having money diverted to for-profit charter schools, you're going to vote for a Democrat. And so having, cast that ballot for a Democrat, hoping that they are going to stand up for things that you care about and then have them switch their party because it's more advantageous, I think is disingenuous to their voters. Yeah,
and I think that in both cases they did this, and they had their specific reasons why they did it. I know Cassell said it was anti-Semitism in the party. In the case of Susan Valdez, different things with Hispanics getting enough attention, what have you. But as we know with Susan Valdez, she actually tried to become the Hillsborough County Democratic executive chair a week before she flipped. So that conversion happened pretty quick. So I'm with you on this, and we can maybe get into it. I definitely want to get it before we have you go about the Democrats and what their chances are perhaps in 2026 here, because we're seeing certain things here that are exciting Democrats after being down in the dumps for the last year after the loss in the presidential election. Speaking of partisan politics, let's talk about congressional redistricting, because this is something that we know you're not in that committee, right? There's a select committee right now in the House that had a meeting again this past week. It's had two meetings so far in the last week or so. And this is, let's just make this as basic as we can, because it can get all into the weeds here. Basically, I don't know if the House is going to meet again during the session, because Ron DeSantis and now even Senate President Ben Alburn says, hey, we're not going to do anything during the session anyway. We're going to wait till after the session to do it. Governor DeSantis insists that this is not about, partisan advantage, which would be, of course, against Florida's Fair District Amendments, right? We have that in law now since 2010. He says this is because we're going to have to react to the U.S. Supreme Court ruling on the Voting Rights Act, Section 2, which is definitely something that many states are going to have to look at when that comes down. Now, the issue is, and we'll see, by the way, how the court rules. Yes, they sound like they were going one way with this when they heard arguments about this, I think in October, actually. Twice they've actually heard this case. So this is a big case, no doubt about it, in the Supreme Court. But Representative Cross, the fact is, they may not come out with a decision until June. I mean, they go up to like June 30th, I believe. And Governor DeSantis wants to have a special session in the spring. But you have an election, of course, a primary election in August. So just forget about whether this is right or not, which I know you disagree with. I don't think this should be happening at all. But just even on the timing on this, they seem to be all over the map.
Yeah, it's a case where, you have a directive from, in this case, the president to do this because he's afraid that he's going to lose seats in the 2026 election in Congress. And, the idea of redistricting is that you redraw the maps when you have new information. Every 10 years we do the census. That's when we're constitutionally required as a legislature to do redistricting. We've already seen DeSantis meddle with the redistricting before the last year with a congressional race where, the seat that had been held by Charlie Crist got subdivided so that now Kathy Castor has part of St. Petersburg and Pinellas, and then the seat that Luna has, extended up into, further north into Pinellas County, making it, essentially very hard to win as a Democrat. So we've already seen that he has a history of getting involved with these things and, deciding how he wants it to go. Our democratic process is built on the idea that voters elect their representatives. They choose their representatives, not the other way around. If we redistrict in the middle of this period, it's going to be the representatives, the people in power choosing their voters, and that's not the fundamentals of a strong democracy.
And they don't have that. They will not. This was confirmed the other day. There'll be no new information, no new census information. They're going to be using the same information they used from the 2022 map. And by the way, though, we'll see how this all plays out, right? Because in Indiana, you might have seen yesterday, Indiana Republicans, they voted against the Trump plan. Trump was calling people up. These people were getting doxxed. They're getting harassed all over the place. These Senate Republicans. And so the Indiana Senate Republican chamber yesterday voted against the redistricting plan. Right now in Indiana, they have, I believe, 9 congressional seats. 7 are controlled by Republicans, 2 by Dems. They would have liked to make it all 9 Republicans. That is out the window. And I wonder, and there's some thoughts about even in Texas where supposedly this will gain them 5+ seats. And maybe in the same thing, by the way, in California, we're supposed to give the Democrats 5 seats. Who knows how people are going to vote, right? I mean, we're seeing some changes, especially with, Latino voters. We saw this in South Florida. Let's actually talk this about right now. So you have this big election in Miami on Tuesday. Eileen Higgins becoming the first Democrat in 3 decades to win as a Democrat in Miami, city of Miami. Now, Manny Diaz was the mayor in the 2000s. He was independent, but he later became the Democratic Party chair. So, he leaned Democratic. But nevertheless, we know Miami-Dade has officially become red in the last year or so. My take on this is that, it's so hard here in Florida. We know for different reasons for the Democrats right now, there's a 1.4 million voter registration advantage for Republicans. But with the Latino/Hispanic voters, who I think are very turned off by the heavy-duty immigration tactics by the president, we're seeing this from Congresswoman Maria Salazar. She's been really worried about this, talking about this. And, so if they even try to do this redistricting map in South Florida, which I think is where they're saying they think they have opportunities, the Republicans do, may not turn out the way they think it's going to be. But we'll have to wait and see, obviously. Yeah.
So I think where the Republicans did well last year in the election is that they really spoke to the things that were important to people, affordability. Trump promised that we were going to lower prices, that tariffs were going to help. We've seen that has been false. Now he's saying that affordability, it's a Democratic hoax.
Yeah.
And we know that, the prices have continued to rise. Life is less affordable than it's ever been. And so I think that in 2026, talking with, Hispanic, Latino voters, Black voters, it is the kitchen table issues. It's affordability. Those are the things that are hitting them. And that's what the Democrats are, proposing. We have got a slate of 3 bills between the House and the Senate Democrats focused on insurance, on home affordability, looking at ways that we can maintain, a good quality of life for people. And that's where I think the Republicans are failing. And I think that's, a concern for them. And I think the Democrats have the chance to pick up seats because we're going to demonstrate that we're the party that's going to, help our working class families.
Again, if you're just tuning in right now, it's 35 minutes past the hour. You're listening to The Skinny here on WMNF 88.5 FM. I'm Mitch Perry, speaking with Pinellas County State Representative, Democratic State Representative Lindsey Cross. Welcome your phone calls, 813-239-9663, talking about the so many different issues in the state that are going to be discussed, obviously, when the legislature gets back officially in January. January 13th is when the 2026 official session begins. There could be more later on in the year. Okay, let's talk about the big issue of property taxes. And on this one, Governor DeSantis, by the way, we've seen this with Blaise Ngolia, Chief Financial Officer Blaise Ngolia, who's been making rounds throughout the whole state, right? This DOGE effort, or FAFO, they call it, laying the predicate to prevent local governments, I believe, from basically saying, this is going to be terrible for us because Blaise Ngolia's take is, local governments are spending too much money. They're overspending, although to this day, Representative Christ, they have not released details about what overspending, whether it's in St. Petersburg and Pinellas County they weren't to, Hillsborough County, et cetera. But nevertheless, the issue itself is going to happen in some way. It seems like they're going to try to do something here on this. Four proposals were advanced in the House so far. Ben Alperin, who, again, the Senate has been really quiet about all this stuff. He did talk this week. He had a big press conference on Monday. He did sound sympathetic to some extent. So I guess we're going to start seeing Senate companion bills to these House bills, because there hasn't been any filed except for Mac Bernard in South Florida has one. I believe you're against this whole concept, but what you say in your own words, what is your biggest fear if, in fact, we get a constitutional amendment on the ballot that says we're going to severely reduce your homestead property taxes next, in 2026?
You're right. I did vote against those four proposals last week in the State Affairs Committee. And I think my biggest fear is that it might sound good. When you're reading a couple sentences on a ballot, oh, yeah, everyone wants less taxes. Everyone wants to keep more money in their pocket. But there's services that the government is uniquely positioned to provide. Things like fire rescue, things like safety, road improvements, utilities, water control, like flood control and protection. Those are things that you're not going to get from a neighborhood association or a faith institution or, a nonprofit. Those are things that the government provides, and that's part of their core functions. These proposals will drastically reduce the amount of funding to our cities and counties, and also groups like the Water Management District, which I spoke on last week. Some of these proposals would cut the Water Management District funding by a third or more. And those regional groups are tasked with providing fresh water for us to drink, with water quality, flood control, and support of our natural systems. And we're already in a deficit of fresh water right now.
Are we in a drought?
About 50% of the state is in a drought. And a paper done by Florida Tax Watch recently demonstrated, that we're going to have several $1 billion worth of deficits in terms of water quality projects. By 2045, the state is projected to have a deficit of close to 400 million gallons per day of water. We're already around 80 million gallons per day. And so that means that if Florida wants to continue to grow and attract, businesses and high-paying jobs, you can't build a sustainable infrastructure and economy without water. That is, we can't live without water. So if the water management districts aren't able to address those core functions, and they don't have other ways to raise revenue, if our cities and counties are going to have to make cuts to fire and rescue and EMS and 911 operators, if they're not going to be able to make improvements to stormwater and flood control, in one of my neighborhoods in Shore Acres, I was fortunate to be able to present a ceremonial check for $1 million yesterday to support some stormwater improvement in the Shore Acres community. 82% of the homes in that area flooded during Hurricanes Helene and Milton.
Yeah.
And the city has an estimate that it's going to be about $67 million just to do some of the work in that neighborhood. And that's ignoring the fact that that's a couple thousand homes. There were close to 15,000 homes that flooded during hurricanes Helene and Milton.
Yeah,
and so
absolutely.
there are huge projects that need to be undertaken, and those are affecting safety, people's quality of life. So, I don't want to see a system where if you call 911 or you call the fire department, you're going to get a bill for $1,000 or whatever it is, like a pay to access services.
When you talk to people about this, because I know you are, because it's a big issue that's going to continue throughout the year, depending on what comes out of the legislature, because it has to come out of the legislature, by the way. Ron DeSantis says he's going to have his own proposal, but he's got to give it to somebody in the legislature because that's the way they get on the ballot. And he only wants one, by the way, which I don't know how. I guess you can do it all in one constitutional amendment. But when you talk to the public, are they with you on this? Because you're right. On a certain level, it sounds very appealing, obviously, to get, really severely eliminate, if not outright reduce your property taxes on your property.
I think people, initially think, yeah, let's lower taxes. I think the bigger concern continues to be property insurance,
right,
where we've seen the biggest impacts. And so it's kind of a red herring that, we're not fixing this problem, so we're going to start talking about something else. And by saying it enough times, people are going to start to believe it and then go, oh, yeah, that's the problem. And so we fail to address the thing that is really impacting their bottom line and their pocketbooks. And in the meantime, there's going to be a lot of unintended consequences of this. I think largely the state wants to have more control over the local governments.
Yeah.
If every city or county has to go to the state to, beg for money.
I'm sorry. But he mentioned this, by the way, in his budget announcement the other day, because he says he's going to set aside $300 million, I guess, for the fiscally constrained counties, which will really, they are already kind of special counties now. They don't have as much money, frankly, much revenue. So he's already kind of saying, or we're going to help you out right now. But yeah, they'll be dependent on going up to Tallahassee in a way they don't. They don't. Obviously, preemption hurts a lot local governments already. And we only have, I want to have a couple other things I want to bring up. You talked about water. So, and I know you care so much about this. DeSantis was actually in Tampa last week, Hula Bay in South Tampa. He talked about all the funding he's given to the Everglades and improving water quality and quantity. He announced more than $112 million in grants to improve that. Talked about these different projects. How would you evaluate Governor DeSantis on the issue of water, Everglades restoration?
So I think you have to separate Everglades from water in the rest of the state. I think in terms of Everglades, he's, consistently supported funding and restoration efforts there. So, I appreciate that. There's a lot of areas of the state that haven't gotten the attention that they deserve. The springs are under, are having some dire consequences of too much pollution and, agriculture and encroaching development. And so that's an area where some of those recommendations out of the Blue-Green Algae Task Force have not been acted on. So in a lot of other areas, I think he's doing a really poor job. We need to have more commitment for our land conservation programs like Florida Forever and Rural and Family Lands, particularly Florida Forever, which took a massive cut last year. That was more the fault of the legislature than the executive branch this time. But having money for Resilient Florida grant program, we had a lot of money that came down from the federal government under the Biden administration. And so we had some artificially high amounts of funding for some proactive things like resiliency that we don't have anymore. And so the state needs to step up because the amount of need far surpasses the investments that we're making as a state.
I've got a couple of notes, emails that have come in, Representative Cross, one being from, let's see here, Slate County. It says, thanks for your show. Very interesting. I have not heard anyone weigh in on what the elimination of property taxes will do to the 14 children's service councils in 14 counties in Florida established by taxpayer votes on referendum. This person said it worked for the Children's Board of Hillsborough County for many years. Your guest and you, as Pinellas residents, are no doubt familiar with Juvenile Welfare Board.
Sure.
So, yeah, I mean, there could be implications, I suppose, there.
Yeah, so these property tax amendments look at protecting, in some cases, school districts.
Yeah, school and law enforcement.
And law enforcement,
Yeah.
but it doesn't include fire and rescue. It doesn't include libraries. It doesn't include parks.
Were you there when all the fire people went up there?
Yeah.
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 Yeah, I talked about that last week.
Yeah, so I think, some of these things that don't get as much attention, support for early childhood learning, those are probably things that are going to take one of the first cuts.
Right. No, I think that's why this is such, and I think I've covered it extensively so far. And again, we haven't gotten to 2026 yet because it does deserve that people need to know this. It's going to, if it does get on the ballot, again, it's got to get 60%, which we know is not easy to do here. Another thing I want to bring up with you is AI, okay? Artificial intelligence, the Time Person of the Year here. Mm-hmm. So Governor DeSantis, and I said this to my colleagues at work last week, but I'm going to say it to the listeners. I think this is one of his finest hours, okay? Yeah, I'm saying that about his speech last week about a so-called Artificial Intelligence Bill of Rights. He also announced a data centers proposal that would protect consumers from footing the bill for AI data centers. It would also prohibit entities from providing licensed therapy or mental health counseling through artificial intelligence. And says this can be expanded to include use of AI to imitate a licensed professional. The data centers proposal, which and I'll mention to this because I know Democrats are understanding how much people don't like this. Mm-hmm. We haven't really seen these happen here in Florida. We're starting to now, but they're big in Arizona and all these other places. But this, his proposal, and again, he had to give it to a legislator to put into a bill. And we can talk about Trump having its executive order yesterday. But his proposal would protect ratepayers. It says protect utilities from charging Florida residents more to support hyperscale data center development, including electric, gas, and water utilities. Protect taxpayers. No taxpayer subsidies for big tech. Allow local government to prohibit data center construction development. Ensure that water resources are not utilized to the detriment of the public. Prevent the construction, siting, or operation of a data center by foreign principals or on land classified as agricultural, and or lands under a greenbelt exemption, and require setbacks and vegetative buffers. Anyway, so House Speaker Fentress Driscoll was asked at her press conference on Monday about this, and she kind of poo-pooed the idea of a state taking over. She said, quote, "A concern I have is if each state starts regulating AI individually, we're going to end up with a patchwork nationally, and that it could stifle the potential growth and transformative impact of this technology." She said, "I know there's some states like California and Colorado passed their own AI bills." And she said, we really need our federal partners to step into the gap and to give us more guidance and to give us a national framework for this. Now, that just sounds like Donald Trump. Donald Trump last night officially signed this executive order, which supposedly would prohibit this. DeSantis said it won't do that because it's an executive order and Congress needs to pass a bill. So we're still not sure about this. Your thoughts?
Well, I agree with a lot of those statements that taxpayers should not be on the hook for the increased price of energy and water. That's something we know about these data centers is they're energy hogs. A lot of communities think that it's going to be a good thing. They don't actually provide that many jobs, but they take a lot of resources. And so taxpayers are on the hook for that. I was at a national conference this year at the National Council of State Legislators, and this is actually something we voted on and trying to protect communities. I was the only representative from Florida that was in the room, so I got to be the one that voted voted on that issue. But it's a big concern because the energy uses are massive. I actually asked a question in our information technology and budget subcommittee this week about the power needed for these platforms and whether our state agencies have the software, the hardware that they need to run these systems. For now, they're doing okay, but they really are relying on some of these cloud systems, the Googles, the Amazons that are putting these data centers often in rural areas. coming in with a lot of needs and not giving much back to the community.
Also. Not related, actually. So there was a hearing for a bill that Senator Don Gates is sponsoring on Public Service Commission reform. I think he proposed this last year. It didn't go anywhere. He's already amended it already, so some people don't like it. I think it's watered down. Nevertheless, one of the things that was interesting, so they had some folks, though, was it this? I'm getting confused with different committees I saw. I did see a committee. Okay, maybe it wasn't the Gates bill. It was another one I watched the other day. This is like just instructional, right? People were going up there, but they were talking about AI, and it was from somebody from Florida Power and Light, our biggest utility provider in the state, not us up here in the Tampa Bay area, of course, but throughout the state. I believe they have 6 million individual accounts, 12 million customers. And the woman there, and I still need to check this out because this is part of their big, massive rate hike increase, was that they got some tariffs where she says that there will be no upfront cost paid for by ratepayers for data centers once they start coming online. Now, I had read earlier that there was a tariff where it would be between 70 and 90% that would have to be paid up front. And so I'm still unclear, and I haven't, I just wrote what she said the other day, but I still need to look into this. But the point being that at least FP&L is saying that unlike what we've seen before with, recovery costs, right, where we've had to pay on our bills for things like nuclear plants that never eventuate, they seem to be, and she was bragging like we're the first, company in the country to do this, which maybe is true, and good for them that's doing that. But I found that was interesting because, again, they're going to come to more rural areas if they do build these data centers. They're probably not coming to St. Petersburg per se, but nevertheless, that seemed to be an encouraging statement. I don't necessarily want to give them the benefit of the doubt on these things, but what do you think?
This is an area that I think we're all learning about, and particularly as a legislature, and how we can, position our state to have the right type of growth and have, be attractive to the companies that are going to actually provide jobs and opportunities for people. So that's something that I'm going to continue to monitor. And, if it's just no upfront costs, that's different. Right. I think we could see a situation where down the line, people's bills are raised artificially because of some of these costs. So I would want to know, the details of how that's going to look, maybe upfront, but in the long term for ratepayers in those areas.
A couple notes here for your Representative Cross. Let's see, Margaret, I want to say here, she says she's lived here since '83. After her first year here, she became aware of Florida's water concerns. She talks about Pinellas County keeping them informed about water conservation. She says, I find it very disturbing that, again, we are hearing about water deficits and the impending future situation, yet the unbridled growth in our state ignores this issue. Without water, our state cannot survive. What's wrong with government? St. Petersburg going vertical is a primary example of deaf, dumb, and blind leadership in the name of money. Vertical. We're seeing some huge buildings in downtown St. Pete.
So I'll say that the type of development strongly influences the amount of, water and energy usage, the number of road miles required. So more dense development and multi-use development actually can save resources. So as much as you might not like the changes to the skyline in St. Petersburg, more dense urban areas, actually, there's an economy of scale. And so the worst type of development that we can do is those sprawling subdivisions that are not connected to anything, where you got to get in your car just to go to the Publix or to your doctor's office, and, tens of miles of sewer and water lines just to access all of these new homes and businesses. So I think there's a place for the appropriate amount of density increases, and that will provide people with more options, more walkability, and ultimately reduce our water usage.
And one other thing here, Jo Ellen writes, actually, Jo Ellen coming up in just a few minutes with her show. She says, the nonprofit I work for is starting to present geothermal energy as an alternative for these power hogs. Is that on the radar of decision makers?
That's not something that I've heard much of, but we do know that Tallahassee in the last few years has been has pushed back on any types of alternative energy, whether it's solar or wind, just making it much more difficult to do anything. But the, production and use of fossil fuels like oil, gas, and What's the last one? Coal. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Now, they're talking about these small nuclear reactors. Are you familiar with those at all? They've been talking a little bit about, not full-on nuclear plants, but nuclear modules. I forget what the phrase is. But anyway, that is something that I've written about, and they still have a long way to go. But that, what are your thoughts as an environmentalist on nuclear power? Because it definitely is not, it's not fossil fuel, but some environmentalists are still not happy with going there.
I'm not going to make a statement for or against that. I know that there are some proponents. It is cleaner. My parents live in a community where there is nuclear power. Like many things, if it goes right, it's all good. If it goes wrong, it can go really wrong.
Representative Cross, we're going to now hang out here for the next few minutes here before we get out here. Don, are you going to talk to us right now? Oh, where Crystal is. Okay, so what we've got going on, Crystal Rodriguez on the phone. Okay, so I want to tell our listeners here, I want to get this in before we get out of the show today. There is coming up on December 17th, a quote-unquote Jingle Mingle festive event that's going to bring some local... Don Scott. Don, good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Perry. How are you?
Hey, great to see you here. So tell us what's going on December 17th.
December 17th is the Jingle Mingle holiday party hosted by KLR Creative Solutions and All City Solutions. It's our annual holiday party. We have about 15 candidates coming out.
Political candidates
from state representatives, judicial candidates is being held at the Bricks Smoked Meats.
Where's this at?
In Brandon. Amanda's here from the Bricks Smoked.
Hi, Amanda.
Hi there.
So we will be hosting this event. We're also doing a school supply drive for the Access Department at Riverview High School. So we're doing a school supply drive. It started Wednesday, December 10th. It will go all the way up until the 17th, the night of the event. All are welcome to come to the event, to come out. It's a holiday party.
That's, I guess, next Wednesday, right?
Next Wednesday, 6 p.m., complimentary appetizers at the Bricks.
Okay.
Smoked Meats in Brandon. 6 p.m.
And we've got here on the phone Crystal Rodriguez.
Crystal, yes, I believe she works with the Access Department. I'll let Crystal take it from
Crystal,
here.
are you here with us here on the Skinny?
Yes, I am. How are you guys?
Great to talk to you. So this event is now school supplies. You want people to bring school supplies, and tell us a little bit more about what you got going on here in the next minute or so.
So this is pretty much primarily dedicated to, as you can hear, the buzzard is going off. Pardon that. But this is primarily dedicated to the Access Department at Riverview High School. For those who do not know, Access it's a department that is responsible for ensuring equal access to educational opportunities for all students, primarily students with unique abilities. So what we're doing is we're trying to gather supplies for our Access teachers and our Access students. And by those supplies, it's not your general traditional paper, crayon, pencils, but more of the fidgets, the sensory items, headphones, cleaning products. There's just a big need in our community for that department and that demographic. So that's kind of what this.
So what would you like people to, if they could go buy this, kind of school supplies? What are we talking about specifically here?
When we ask for school supplies for this particular department, we're looking for Kleenex wipes, sanitary products. There's a wish list on our website, and they're asking, pretty much teachers are asking for classroom snacks. They're asking for headphones for these students to be able to listen to their, electronics in the classroom. Just pretty much things like dry erase markers that our students can actually benefit from.
Okay, fantastic. And Don Scott, again, so the Jingle Mingle, there'll be some candidates. People get to know who these folks are running for office. I think you have several judicial candidates are also in the mix.
Nina Alvarez, who's a judicial candidate, will be there. Leland Baldwin, who's a judicial candidate, will be there. Okay. Wingate Newton, who's running for state representative.
Oh, Wingate coming back to the legislature, perhaps.
Wingate may be he'll definitely be in the building.
Yeah.
Again, Mitch, we have about 16 of Kimberly Overman.
Is there any website or anything that people can get information on?
Absolutely. You can check out our All City Solutions Facebook page, the KLR Creative Solutions Facebook page. And the All City page, the All City website will launch on Monday. So thanks for that.
Okay. Well, I'm glad we got you in here for the end of the show because we want people to know about that. Definitely holiday season. Want to help out folks when we can. Okay, that's going to be it for us here today. Representative Lindsey Cross, thank you so much for coming in today.
Thank you. Happy holidays.
Happy holidays to you and yours. Happy holidays to our audience. We'll be back one more show next week before Christmas, of course. Looking forward to that. I believe we're going to have the Democratic candidate for Attorney General, Jose Javier Rodriguez, will be on with us. You'll want to tune in for that. Okay, want to make sure to thank everybody who's helped out this show today, and that includes Skip Sassy, our engineer, Anthony Maduro on the phones. I'm Mitch Perry. You are listening to WMNF 88.5 FM in Tampa. Stay tuned for Joe Ellen Schilke, the hostess with the mostest, coming up next. Thank you very much. Listen.